Hello, welcome to this video. And on this video, I am going to be explaining why I think we don't need no music education. So, I've been giving music education a lot of thought over the last 30 years. I was a lecturer in a college, I was a head of music. I had to think deeply about how to deliver music and how to teach people music and what it was fundamentally that you were trying to teach. Recently, I've been starting to think that the world has changed so much, education has changed so much, and music's changed so much that the old ideas we have around music education just aren't working anymore. On this video, I'm going to be taking a long time to discuss why I think music education either needs to change or to go, but I will also be putting it in a cultural context which is going to require a lot of explanation. All right, to sit us culturally here in the West where we are actually at now. Now, you might have noticed that I am not in my old studio. In fact, I've left my old studio in my garage and I am now in the newer environment of here. And I am going to try and do something here which I hope will be a new way of delivering music and creative education. But before we get into the video, let's just go back in history and have a think about how we got here. So I'm sat in my town, and my town exists in a certain place. It grew up here because the environment was conducive to a certain industries, to certain people gathering together. If I turn around here behind me, and I'm going to have to walk backwards now, behind me, I don't know if you can see that, I'll go right up here, is a river. This river runs through my town. And this river was really important for the development of the carpet industry. The carpet industry grew up because of that river being here and other geographical and social factors, okay? So that is why this town exists. In 1850, this factory behind me was built. This became the heart of my town. That heart was beating for a certain amount of time and then it stopped. And when it stopped, this town sort of ground to a halt. Is there a reason for this town to be here anymore once this has closed its eyes and gone to sleep? And this idea of thinking about the heart of a community, the heart of a country, the heart of a culture, and what that heart is very interesting, because the heart has to sustain you. And that's what this factory did. It provided jobs, it provided a focus, it provided the reason why this is all here. This originally was a rope building. They made rope. It's 5 stories high, and the rope was made at the top and then sent down. And there was, you can't see it anymore, but there was a harbour here. And so once the rope was made, the barges could stop there and they could drop the rope on and they could take it on. You need water, you need a certain type of, all sorts of different things. You need to be in a certain location to make carpets. I'm sat on what was one of the biggest carpet factories in my town, okay? But this has gone. Now, you're probably thinking, why does this matter? What's this got to do? The same thing has happened to music. Music as we know it now, the music that I grew up with, music still exists, but it's moved on. Carpets still exist, but they've moved on, right? The world changes and we are left with a legacy. And here in the West, we are left with a legacy which has a lot of history behind it, but a lot of the things that drove it and made it so great have switched off. It's switched off. And I think that we are also going into a point now where we are starting to find our history disgusting, that we find it that we are focusing on the bad parts of that history, which is undermining the way we see ourselves And that goes from us as a country, us as a Western culture, and also us as individuals, communities, okay? I want to show you something else before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video. I am now in the heart of another factory that is on this site. And when you walk around here, you can see that these machines that you can see behind me at one time were churning out carpet, and then suddenly it stops. This is the lungs of this town. This is the machinery that basically breathes life into the town. As we walk around it, we can see that it's stopped, almost like a museum piece. These incredible machines all around us, and then the detritus of 20th century civilization has been dumped in here. I think because at some point this stopped and it just became, at best, a vessel for stuff. It's festooned with all sorts of things. As I walk around it, I can see things from my childhood. I can see things from my teenage years. Now we're going into where they used to store the yarn. And this is a pretty dark room, so it's going to go very dark, but I want it to go dark because I see this as almost being the unconscious aspect of this place. Behind me, you can see tens of thousands of yarn. The yarn that made the carpets, okay? Left here, these once had a value. And now, do they have a value now? We find stacks and stacks of carpets. This place stopped. At a certain point, it stopped. It was no longer of use. A very similar thing has happened with music, I think. The music industry grew up around recorded music in the 20th century. Once they found that they could sell this new thing, which was music on something physical, a record, studios started to emerge. Record labels started to emerge, and these record labels were modelled very much on the Hollywood studio system. So you had a machine that would find talent and bring it together, a little bit like Henry Ford would create a conveyor belt of music. This meant you had to have songwriters, you had to have singers who were artists that could perform, you had to have musicians that would perform the music, you had to have studios that could engineer the music, you had to have arrangers that could take the songs and arrange them for the orchestras that would play behind the musicians, and so on and so forth. On top of that, then you had a means of producing these records, of distributing these records. This threw up things like radio, concert tours. Everything was based around that system, and that system became very, very good at what it did. The ability to access that system for a creative person was impossible. You had to be signed to access it. And once you accessed it, you then accessed these specialized talents. These specialized talents had to be taught. The system that taught music education was the system that was taken from the classical music world. Classical music is another example of music creating a completely different kind of structure, growing organically out of what it was in existence. So before recording, the only way you could document music was to write it down on a piece of paper. The ability of composers to put their ideas down on a piece of paper and then create a structure then where you would have musicians trained in a certain way to interpret those structures, conductors that would be able to look at them and try and fill in the gaps of the stuff that wasn't on the paper, also became a very highly skilled technology. Musicians had to be trained. They had to be able to train to read music. They had to be able to train to understand the forms. Forms are very important because people like to understand the music before they started to work on it. So you had fugues, you had concertos, you had symphonies. That would give people an idea going in. So that had to be taught. And of course, colleges emerged to teach that. And those colleges were needed because you couldn't access that information. Now, there's a thing that you need to understand with all education. When somebody starts at an endeavor and they want to learn about stuff, There are things in there that are intuitive, and those intuitive things, the person who is learning will be able to teach themselves. It's quite obvious, they know where to go. But within education, there is also an esoteric part of the subject, which is counterintuitive, and that's where teachers need to step in. If you are a musician that loves music and you want to end up working in an orchestra, many of the things you might be able to work out yourself, but there will be a lot of these things in there, right? And I tell you something, in normal education, learning to read and write is counterintuitive. Learning to walk and talk is intuitive. We don't need schools to teach people how to talk, but we need schools to teach people how to write. I could go in for the reasons of all that, but if you think about it, it's quite obvious. It's because we have a motivation within us to talk, which is why we don't have a motivation for us to read and write, because in terms of an evolutionary history, that was developed much later. Okay, exactly the same as with music. There's a number of skills. There's loads and loads of skills that need to be taught in the old style of music. In the 20th century, with the advent of digital technologies and the internet, this has been slowly democratizing the creative process in music. And we are moving more and more away from the skills. Now, there is a great glop of people who think that creativity is skill. And when they listen to music, they feel like they are appreciating the skill, but they're not. What they're doing is they're feeling the music, right? And then they are in awe of the skill required to give you that feeling. Because in performed music, which is the music of the 20th century, recorded performed music, the way to do it is you had to play an instrument. And again, that required a skill. But with the advent of blues, with the advent of jazz, and the uptake of those into the music industry that are now emerged in the 20th century, started to change it. And that studio system of having all those delineated parts that are highly skilled, that starts to fracture and it starts to move down. And what rock and roll is, fundamentally, rock and roll is the self-containment of all of that into one unit, the band. It starts with Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Suddenly you now have a band that they write their own stuff, they perform their own stuff, they arrange their own stuff. They're even involved in the recording process. Eddie Cochran was somebody who was similar as that. Everly Brothers was similar to that. And so in the 1960s, when the British bands like the Beatles start to emerge, the Beatles were incredible because they teamed with George Martin. Now the whole process was self-contained. None of those people went to music college. They didn't need to, because what they were working from was something far more intuitive. They'd grown up with blues, with country music, with rhythm and blues. And these are folk forms. These are forms of music that a community will develop without a music school. So we're going back 60 years and starting to see that you don't need a music college to teach rock music. The jazz musicians like Miles Davis that went to music college, they went to places like Juilliard. They were classical colleges. Jazz education doesn't really emerge to the 1960s. And the reason it starts in the 1960s is because once rock and roll came along and rock came along, jazz starts to move away from being a living form, an intuitive form, and starts to move into an academic form. Okay? And the model that the jazz education establishments used was the classical model. It was based around skill and interpreting the part and learning the language. So suddenly in the 1960s, and this also has to be said, in an industry which is cutthroat, a musician who has had some success when they're young, when they get older and they've learnt those skills on the street, doing it for real, then will find themselves without a job. And it's very easy for a music college to then take that person in and go, this person knows how to do it, and they start to share their knowledge to people. But it changes the dynamic because they never learnt like that. The early jazz educators in the 1960s had not learnt like that. Now, they may well have had private lessons, one-to-one lessons, and I'm going to deal with that on another video because I'm not really addressing my focus on this video there. I'm addressing it on the music colleges, right? So I believe that there was an aspect of rock music that suddenly bypassed, and musicians were now able to buy a Bob Dylan album, learn some blues, get the Eric Clapton album, the Beano album with John Mayall, and before you know it, they're able to get up and going and make highly creative stuff without having to go to the counterintuitive. Does that make sense? So there we are now. We're in the 1960s and 1970s. We have this incredible music form, which is vital, rock music, right? Every time it becomes too sophisticated, in itself, it pulls itself back. You go from progressive rock back to punk. Now, I'm sure you're shouting at me saying people like Rick Wakeman went to music college, but they went to music college within the system of a classical structure with maybe a little bit of jazz. In the UK, no jazz. You had to be in America to go to places like Berkeley, and that didn't emerge till the 60s and 70s. Those kids that were in Berkeley in the 60s and 70s are the fusion musicians, because they're also listening to rock music and they're bringing that in, and that's counterintuitive to their lecturers. Okay? Here in the UK, when I came up in the 1980s, there was no colleges to study rock music. The only college course I could find was at the Guildhall in London, and it was a jazz course, and I did approach it, but I'd had no formal training. I couldn't read music. I had no idea about music theory. I'd grown up listening to Black Sabbath and then discovered the Mavish Duxtra. Jazz fusion wasn't classed as jazz. The whole thing, I just couldn't have got in, okay? In the early 90s, I teamed up with a number of musicians that had been a part of that rock renaissance of the 60s and 70s. And those musicians started to find a loophole in the education system, because they saw rock music as being far more performative than it was about sort of theoretical skills. And I worked with a genius guy called David Roger in the early 90s, and he took an acting course and he started to assess rock bands based upon the criteria of acting. Could they put on a show? Could they work from a script? Could they interpret material? And he was a genius at this. And in the early 90s, and I was a very young man at that point, but I was there watching it happen, these guys set up the first rock music course in the UK, right? Something I've never said on this channel, but I was involved in the creation of the very first rock music courses, which eventually, once they were up and going and they were so successful, because what we found was kids who weren't that academically great, but were creative and had the nous to form a band, be able to get together, write stuff, were then missing this counterintuitive, esoteric part. How do they do gigs? How do they go in front of an audience? How do they access the music business? How do they get their stuff recorded? And so we were able to set up a recording studio, utilize a theatre. And what happened then is musicians at 16 years old could come in and learn that counterintuitive stuff. Once the courses kicked in, and the BTEC courses in the UK were really designed after the stuff that my friends pioneered in the early 90s. And those were the stuff that were put in. So the rock music courses that have existed, still exist in this country, are based upon the idea that you're going to teach someone's ability to focus and plan and get control of their goals. That's a part of what you get assessed on. To be able to go into a studio and operate in there, be able to utilize music technology, to be able to plan performances, to understand the history of rock music, which is very important when you're writing music. And those became the qualities that were assessed in the current music BTECs, right? The big esoteric part back in the 90s was the recording studio part. Recording studios back then cost £250,000. The only way you could get in them was pay a ton of money, because you had to buy huge mixing desks and reel-to-reel recorders and outboard effects. And nobody could get into a music studio. I used to make me laugh when I worked in music colleges, that we'd be sat in a proper recording studio, and these 16-year-old kids on the first day would come and sit in it. And I can remember thinking, I didn't even get to go in a studio until my mid-20s, and it was an 8-track, and it was a pile of crap. These kids suddenly had access to this stuff. In the late 90s, the computer technology started to come in, the music technology part of these courses became so more important. Now, if you go to a lot of these courses, the academic part focuses on the music technology aspect. So we are producing music technologists. But as the industry has developed, and this is why I wanted to show you that huge empty factory full of the detritus of 20th century culture, is people who watch this channel and we listen to these outdated ways of listening and these outdated ways, right? This is the detritus of 20th century music, right? We older people walking around that factory going, oh, I remember that toaster. Oh, I remember that to that. This is what is going on. It's almost become fetishistic, okay, at our end of it. In music education, what's been happening is the colleges had to move more and more towards music technology, but the kids that are making dance music, that are making grime, that are making trap, all these things that I can't even remember the name of that exist, they aren't coming to the college. They are out intuitively making it. They don't need the music colleges, so those kids aren't coming through. So music colleges are now relying on kids whose parents listen to Dire Straits or Pink Floyd and push them to learn guitar and bass, and they have an interest in that. Now, another idea has emerged within education. When I went to college, I went to art college and I studied fine art. I was a painter. And what was impressed on us at that time was that we weren't there to get a job. We were there to learn about the creative process and become creative individuals. The idea that the creativity was the highest value in a modern culture, and I still believe that's the case. I may have been indoctrinated in college to think that, but that is how I think. And I'm going to touch on that later in this video. But as time has gone on, we have all been sold the idea that the sole purpose of school is to teach people the skills so they can get a job. Once that was established, right, the powers that be started to look at the courses and go, well, we're spending a lot of money on public money here on paying for little Johnny on his music BTEC course to spend 2 years learning how to play rock music. I mean, is he going to get a job in that? Right? And then the idea is they go, well, what job is there if you studied rock music? Well, it's a rock star, isn't it? And these dogmas have emerged, right? The people who teach on these music courses in the old days had often worked in the industry because the industry existed. I'm 56 years old. I've made albums. I've toured. I've played with, relatively big artists. That's my experience. I could bring that in and pass on the counterintuitive aspects of that to the kids that are in the room. So many kids have said to me that when they've gone on to work in the industry, that they didn't really understand what we were teaching them. But once they were out in the real world and they hit the real things, they'd go, oh, light bulb, yeah, I remember Andy was talking about this. I know what this is. And they were able to deal with it. Those are the skills that we were actually teaching, okay? But a thing has emerged within music colleges, I believe. Here in the UK, we have 2 tiers of music colleges. We have music courses within normal FE colleges, right? And then we have music courses within normal HE universities, okay? The people that are on top of that, running those courses, do not understand creativity because they are not from the creative world. When you sit and talk to these people, they don't understand that the music industry is still an industry that exists, that it is still chock full of jobs, that there are jobs there, and there's all sorts of jobs. There's people who deal with copyright, there's people who deal in publishing, there's people who work in recording studios, there's people that make music for computer games, there's people who run venues, there's people who run record shops, there's people who make equipment, musical equipment, there's people that sell musical equipment and distribute. It's a huge industry. The powers that be that are running this do not know that. When they write a BTEC course, they go to professionals who do know this and they try and put these things in. But also there's this idea that things have to be academic. And the idea of the vocational aspect is being split apart at the moment. So you have vocational courses and you will have in the future academic courses. So if you want to study music, you will have to study academically. You will have to look at different styles of classical music, all skills that will not help you be creative or help you get a job in the industry. Over here on the vocational side, politically what's happened is they are not providing a route through to become a vocational musician. It's not there. Now you'll probably say, well, why isn't it there if you're saying all these jobs are there? And the reason is because those jobs are sought after. People want to do those jobs. And so what happens is there is enough kids coming from highly privileged backgrounds that can pay their own way to get educated, right? And get these highly prized jobs. If you're a millionaire and you've got a kid and your kid said, well, what do you want to do with your life? I've been a chartered accountant and I've now set my own finance firm up and we've made lots and lots of money. What do you want to do? They go, well, I'd like to work in the music industry. I'd quite like to work at Glastonbury and blah, blah. If you've got a job. This is the way it's all working. That's what's going on. There is plans in this country to make music, take away the vocational aspect. If you want to study music, you'll have to go the A-level route, which means you'll have to do, say, music and then 2 other subjects, right? And then you will have to go and do your music degree, and that will be an academic thing. If you want to go to work in the industry, you won't need to go that route now. And the reason is because the technology is enabling people now to work in the industry at all levels without actually needing to go through the very strict skills required in the old days to make the music. We are now making music with the AI. I know people, I've talked to them where they have gone onto a site and they've written in, do something that's like a bit reggae-fied but sounds a bit like Metallica and do a song about the devil, and then AI produces the song and then they'll go, I've got this great song, Andy, as though they've created it. Now, this isn't common, but we know in 5-10 years that's the way it will be. The skill aspect of music has been democratized. You don't need it anymore to make music. If you're making documentaries and you need music to go in the background, you won't need that. So the whole thing as we know it is dying. The music industry is, as we know it, it's still there. It's still going to make a lot of money. The music industry as we know it is becoming that factory I showed you at the start. I wanted you to embody what it's like. I want you to see the wreck of it and the beauty of it. The sereneness of seeing something which is once majestic, but just closed its eyes, breathed its last breath, and breathing my last breath made me cough. So there's another aspect to all of this. The one thing that is really difficult to factor into all this and has been lost is the idea of creativity. I believe after 30 years working in this and putting my heart and soul into trying to create structures where people who are creative don't end up dying because they can't express themselves. And when a creative person doesn't express themselves, it becomes self-destructive. I believe as the creative aspects of the education system have been removed, as that's become more structured. So a kid doing GCSE music or GCSE art are having to work through a very strict academic structure, so it looks like that course will give them the skills to get them a job. Right? My daughter's doing art at the moment, and she is giving it up because there were too many structures of going, take these elements, mix it in that, do a drawing in the style of Van Gogh, now do it in another summer. And the creative process just does not work like that. And the teachers are saying it does. But are the teachers creative people? And do we as a culture really understand what creativity is? On this channel, over the last 2 years, I have tried to use all this to gather people around me to be able to talk fundamentally about creativity. And I have done hundreds of videos where I've tried to deal with this. Over the next few views, as I'm sat in my lovely new studio, I really want to address this idea of education. And the reason is because I'm trying to do something different here. And I'm focused on it, and I believe I'm right because it seemed to work, All right. So the question is, firstly, why do we need creative people? And is a college now the right place to teach creativity? My answer to that at the moment is I'm not sure. But I can tell you one thing, that the music colleges are no longer teaching creativity. Okay? When I got out of education a couple of years ago, I know now that course that I once run, where I really, outside of the remit of the criteria we're trying to teach, I was putting in the fact that I wanted people to write music, I wanted them to be innovative, I wanted them to be aware of their image and their performance, to be able to entertain people when they got on stage, but most importantly, that they were learning how to be them, right? And when you learn how to be yourself, that can require a huge bunch of counterintuitive skills, but for other people, it's just intuitive and they just know what to do. I will assure you and promise you, if you now go and look at that course now, all those kids are doing is learning cover versions. Creativity has been pulled out of it. People who are involved in it are not necessarily that creative. And the ones who are creative will be being frustrated by the structures that are being put in to those courses. If people want to argue with me about this, we should have a fair discussion on it. And now I've got my lovely studio here. I can bring in people. If anybody thinks that I am saying something that's not true, let's come in and have a discussion about it, because I am convinced that this is the case. Right? So at the moment, if you look at courses, they are not teaching creativity. The creative genius that we saw in people like Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker and Lester Young and Duke Ellington and Dave Brubeck and the great jazz musicians, that has been replaced now with elitist colleges where you have to have money to go and study jazz, where you have to have a financial backing to then go out and be a jazz musician. And what you do is you regurgitate the cliches that you have been taught within that college. Now, within that, there'll be creative people that will be able to take that and turn that into something creative. That is always there. So people are going to argue me and point and say, well, this person that's just come out of music college is creative, and this person that comes out of music college is creative. I understand that. On this channel, I interviewed Matt Tavares, who was one of the founder members of Bad Bad Not Good, a contemporary jazz group that I do believe are very creative and have gone against that sort of elitist idea. The reason they're called Bad Bad Not Good is because they didn't possess the sort of high level jazz skills that we all value now. And so they were seen in the hierarchy of music colleges as being in the lower echelons. So they called themselves Bad Bad Not Good. They then came out and they changed jazz. They did things that were very interesting, but all the way through it, they got criticised for not being heavyweight players that could just stream bebop licks out. That is de rigueur now. You have to have that to work in jazz. Jazz is dead. Jazz has no creative reason to be anymore. It is just the embodiment of elitism. It has become like grand opera. Right, these are the things we have to deal with. Does that mean that jazz is dead? The former genre is, the structures are, there are creative musicians that are still expressing themselves within the jazz world. Loads of them. But it's fighting, right? It's fighting to exist. Now, I want to come to the last part of this video, and I'm going to be coming back on this. This is one of these videos where I introduce the ideas I'm about to talk about. I've sat down and introduced them. I'm going to go back in and try and fill the details on forthcoming videos, and I'm going to be dealing with this because I think it's important. I have been working for a number of years to try and get into an environment like this. At the moment, up until now, I've been working out of my garage. Now I can bring people in, I can bring in bands in, and this is the key. Doing YouTube, I've started to realize how creativity has shifted. Creativity is no longer in the carpet factory of the music business or the carpet factory of the film business. All those things are falling apart, but there's actually more opportunities on the internet and online. But the thing is, talking to musicians, they do not know how to access it. And the reason is because the structures they have been taught and the structures that are being pumped out of music colleges, right, do not fit. Being in a band, writing songs, going out and gigging them, none of that works anymore. And anybody who's in a band knows that that is the case. It needs to be a different model. Music will survive. Performed music will survive. It might become a minority thing. The great, unwashed out there, sorry to use such a horrible term, but I say this because I think that is the way our culture sees them. We will be quite happy to just churn AI computer-based hip-hop, rap, whatever it is at them. They're too unsophisticated to understand, and that's not the case, right? But that is the idea that is out there. The elites will then be able to get the key jobs in those areas and swan about backstage feeling like they're doing a job when they're just really hanging out with important people, which is making them feel important, right? But real creative music making will exist. You can make creative music on a computer. You can do all these things. I'm not saying you can't. But creativity is the key, and it's complex. We have to understand what creativity is. But creativity, once you've identified what it is, you then need to align it with the way the world is now. Right? I am in a situation here where I've taken this idea of talking about music, and what the thing is, you say, but sorry, I've got a bit cough today. Say we look at I've lost my thread now. I've done really good up until now. You see me in my posh studio. I've got my lights up. I've got my brick wall. I've got my expensive turntable here. Somebody was criticising my AWA speakers. Now I've got some nice posh ones here now. Can you see them? Got my nice expensive tannoy speakers. They're all right. I've got my Arcam amp there with the Rotel amp just to power that. I'm in here now. I can do stuff in here. But this is not conducive to bands. I'm going to be exploring what I want to do here. And I think on the scope of this video, I've now got to the point where I have to leave that for a later video. Philosophy Sundays will be dealing with this from now on. The other videos I put on a week will all be the usual album rankings and all that type of stuff. I'm going to be doing all of that stuff too, but I'm doing it for a reason. Now, for me to be here, right, in this place is huge. I've shown you a tiny bit of it. I'm involved with a charity called the Jellermans Heritage Art Charity. I've worked with them, and the idea is to take this dead heart of this town, right, to take those lungs that are no longer working and get them working again. But there is no carpet industry here anymore. There actually is. There's a small distribution firm on here, so it's still alive. But this is the creative heart of this town. And what I want to do is put creativity back in. And I want people who feel frustrated to not feel that they've got to go to music college and go through that thing, because it is not conducive to creativity. Creative people tend to have mental health issues. I want them to see that there's like a beacon of light here, and I want them to be able to wander in, and myself and all the other people. There's loads of other people that are coming together, counsellors, artists, sculptors, all sorts of different people, dance groups, all creative people are coming into this place, and I want it to be a hub where people can wander in and explore their creativity unencumbered by some awful music education system that has become so restrictive that creativity has been completely squeezed out of it. And I want to attract the creative people, and I want to show them how you can negotiate your creativity in the modern world. That means identifying the fact that you're creative, identify the destructive aspects of that and getting them under control, fighting against the perfectionism, fighting against the self-loathing that stops you from getting somewhere, being able to have the skills to work, being around other people that are talking about creative stuff that fires you up, and being able to understand that we actually have in our hands, and I say literally in our phones, a way of expressing ourselves creatively. Forget about the jobs, forget about the money, get the creative stuff sorted out. And it will not be music. It will not be in this form anymore. It won't be like that. Music is about to shift. Or what? Creative music is about to shift, right? The thing is changing. I have been involved in it for 30 years and I think I'm on top of this. Now, the final bit of this video, if you've got to the end of it, it's because you find this very interesting. 35 years ago, my mentors set up a system that allowed kids to come in and find their creative heart. I am sure that some of them are watching this video now. Please, if you're an ex-student of mine, you're watching this, put a comment down below just to prove that this is the case and how important this was. But it's now gone, right? One of the guys that was my mentor back then, one of the guys that was the architect of those courses is here with me. He has a room. He's gone into all sorts of other creative realms. We are trying to do something. If this works, this could be rolled out. On my way to film this video, they had a thing on the radio about Birmingham Library. When I was doing my degree in art, I did my dissertation in French New Wave film. That library was invaluable. It had so many like old French magazines about film. None of that is accessible on the internet. The internet hasn't got all the answers. I lived in there pulling out all the information to do my dissertation. Birmingham Library is a wonderful building in the heart of Birmingham, and they don't know what to do with it. It needs to change. And the thing that needs to go in there is creativity. Creativity is at the heart of everything. It's so important. We are sat here because some creative person realised that they could make carpets. And you'll go, but that's not like music. Yes, it is. The carpet is designed. It's a thing of beauty. It's a thing that you have to elevate your experience. It required artists and designers, people who understood colour. These factories created carpets that ended up in the Queen's mansions. It made the carpets that went to the Eiffel Tower. And when you go up the Eiffel Tower, those carpets in there. I don't know if it was this specific factory, but it was the factories around here. That's a bit of history I don't know. The point is the Jellyman's Heritage Arts Charity has been set up to do this. If you're interested in what I'm doing, and I'm going to pull it off, it doesn't matter what happens. I am determined to make this work by hook or by crook. But if you see that there is something of worth here, and I'm not just a YouTuber coming on here just to talk about the fact that I like Genesis, if you can see that that's here and can see the potential of what I'm now about to do with this channel, using my expertise as a musician in the industry and as a music educator, then down below there is a link to the Heritage Arts Charity, and you can donate some money onto that. I thank everybody that has already done that. I mentioned this very slightly last week, nowhere in the detail of here what my intentions were, and it did. People started to donate. I'm going to talk about this on a separate video. I'm going to do a whole video about this. Creativity is the thing that we have in our lives that make it worth living. Our loved ones and art, those are the two things. If we want to have a civilized society that values people, then we have to have a creative aspect. Once you remove that, we are just fighting for existence. And once we're fighting for existence, we will fight each other. This is massively important, that you understand how important creativity is. Some people out there watching this are well off. They have excess cash. Other people don't. For creativity to work, everybody who loves and appreciates the fact that their lives are improved by it, they need to put in what they can. And if you are poor, it's putting in the support of the artists out there and then getting involved in it. But if you do have some spare income and you want to try and be a part of doing this, then please drop a little bit of money into the PayPal for the arts charity. And as I always say at the end of my videos as well, you can support me by putting a like on it. You can support me by subscribing. You can support me by becoming a patron. I am working closely now with my patrons on this. So the thing with my patron is this is going to serve the local community, but it's already, the word's going out, and there's people going to be coming here. In some cases, I've already organised jazz fusion legends will be coming here. People are going to be coming from outside to be in this environment. And the reason I want that is because if somebody walks on the streets who feels depressed, I want them to go, right, I'm depressed. But those guys have actually worked in the industry, and I want people to be able to access them and get hyped up by the fact that you can do this if you want. If you want to support me, you can become a patron, and they have really, in terms of donations and ideas and all the other stuff that they've been doing, they have really come up trumps over the last week. And I think their donations have meant that my place now is in here is secure at least for a few months. This place is an incredible idea. It's just formed, the structures are in, but it's like trying to climb out now. We just need to get some financial security. And what it really is, I'll tell you now, the winter's coming up and the fuel bill on this place is huge. And we need to be able to pay for that, or the place will have to shut down over the winter. I'll be there in my parka and my scarf. You know, I'll have to start burning some of these records. And also you can support me in what I'm doing by putting some money into my PayPal. I am really excited about this. This is going to happen, right? And I'm hoping this is going to get somewhere. And I'm hoping in 5 years' time, we will have all played the part in creating a structure for creative people, because that's what's needed. It's depressing if you're creative and you can't see a way through. I'm going to try and show people how to do that. You arrogant git, Andy. You think you know everything. I don't know everything, but I have managed, I think, in my life to fluke some experiences. And I think recently going through the frustration of seeing the demise of music education, right? Now, other people will say it's still there, but for me, it's just my point of view. I have always put creativity first, and I saw that being just destroyed with nobody above you that would even get what you were saying. I think that experience has forced me that every single day of my life for the last how many years, I've been trying to find another way out of this. And I think I have. And the fact that I'm sat here now is, I think, evidence of that. But I haven't done this for me. I want to create a community. I want to create a wider community. I want to create an example that other people can do. I want other people to pick up the ideas. Like, why don't we take over this factory? Why don't we take over this library? Birmingham Library. Open it up to the creative people. You know, open it up to the people who are having mental health issues. Get some counsellors in there. Where's the money where's the money going to come from? I don't know, but I think we have to utilise the creativity. There's people on YouTube that are making millions, right? That money should go back in. It needs to help the community. You see, you all think I'm right wing. I'm not. I'm left wing. You know, I want to put it back, but it has to be under the choice of us. It has to be a democratic redistribution. And creativity is a wonderful thing, a wonderful way of doing it. You know, when you see somebody do some good, I really want to try to help people that are creative. I really worry about kids coming at teenagers and not being able to create a structure in which they understand their creativity and they can work in it. This is the video. Sorry, no laughs. Believe me, I am not going to change now I'm here. I will be doing all the stuff that I've done before, but this was a serious one. Philosophy Sunday. They're often very serious. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one.